Welcome to the Open Treasury Podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. And now your host, Jack Large.
Hello and welcome to the third Open Treasury podcast from CTMfile. I'm Jack Large, editor of CTMfile, and have with me Craig Jeffery, managing partner at Strategic Treasurer, and our deputy editor, Ben Poole. Today we're going to be reviewing the latest Treasury news and developments. We're going to start with one that you've actually done today from CLS, Ben, and you talk about them launching in the foreign exchange outstanding datasets. What does that really mean? What's the impact of this story?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So essentially, CLS, which is, I think most people would know, a settlement infrastructure, has launched two new datasets to capture outstanding forward and swap positions in the FX market, and has also made some upgrades to existing FX data products that it has. FX datasets basically highlight movements in volume in various FX markets, such as the spot market, swaps, forwards, and so on, and help to improve the understanding of the global currency markets for any party that's got exposure to them. So for treasurers, these datasets can be used, for example, to help inform on FX hedging strategies or FX policies that the Treasury has in place, for example. So these new ones from CLS, the FX outright forward outstanding and FX swap outstanding datasets, they're both designed to help users improve their analysis of short-term and also longer-term trends in the FX market, just kind of providing that extra insight in market dynamics that you might want to keep on top of. In the announcement that CLS made, the outstanding forward and swap position reports are going to be introduced on a daily basis. So kind of getting that daily visibility into cash flow and the way that the market's moving, and also help a bit of analysis around pre and also post-trade. So it's really just kind of a tool to help inform and enhance, I think, FX management for everyone that uses FX, which obviously does include corporate treasurers.
Okay, and did they mention anything about other parties incorporating these data sets in their systems, their way of managing FX?
I think the announcement from CLS was more just sort of what they're doing at the moment in terms of this new launch, and then also the updates that they're bringing to existing data sets. So they weren't referencing any sort of client activity that they've had. Some of the updates that they've brought to existing data sets include incorporating some new currency pairs into some of their data sets to meet demand, particularly from Asia Pacific. So I won't list them, but it's an awful lot of kind of new currency pairs that they've brought into their data sets to increase the coverage of information around different FX markets.
Okay, that was an important development on the foreign exchange. We had one from P20, the payment group, on how to manage a cyber attack. And what they did was they got 20 experts together and they asked them what would be their 10 best practices. And they they brought all these together into 5 areas: network security, data handling, employee awareness, action before a cyber attack, and action immediately after a cyber attack. And it is by far the best, most comprehensive list I've seen so far. I've not had any reaction from any user yet, but the depth of the questions and the recommendations is quite outstanding. A really must-read article and paper in CTMfile. Did you have any reaction to this, Craig, in terms of how you can manage this sort of framework when you're getting into a cyber attack? Because it's probably too late if you haven't prepared for one.
Well, if you find yourself in an attack, there's nothing you can do but respond. I think this listing of these best practices, there's a couple themes that come out of this that I think help us prepare. One is the constant preparation, upgrading on the system side, and then the human element, the training piece. And there's some really good points in your article there summarizing that. On the network security side, I think this is a theme that correlates to the human side as well. Many organizations run vulnerability scans, usually this internal method of seeing where there might be weaknesses or data that's exposed. And so there's a regular way of doing that. Then there's this, what's typically an annual pen test or maybe semi-annual, where there's you're paying an outside firm to see and find weaknesses, to try to penetrate the system, gain a foothold, and then move laterally. And these are all core and basic, but there seems to be some gaps there too, because the attackers are at this 24/7 with automation all year long. And so we're also seeing this increase of the use of monitoring, where there's technology that's probing and strengthening and scoring your defenses on the system side. And I think that's vital. And then the correlation is we have to update the human element too. But if you're not ready on the system side, you don't have things set up, or your people aren't ready, that's a significant issue. And you're in quite a big state of hurt if you're just figuring things out when you get an attack.
Absolutely. And the 3 actions they recommended immediately after a cyber attack, I thought was spot on. And they were upfront about saying, you've got to tell everybody. You cannot keep this secret. You have to tell the authorities, your investors, your shareholders, etc., etc. Very good, very useful.
Jack, these are, in addition to that type of, public disclosure, many supply chains require this as well. That's getting written into contracts regularly. So this is a new and increased expectation. So,
absolutely, and it's something that's not going to go anywhere, going to go away anytime soon. Changing topics, we had 3 different articles on Swift and their transformation in a number of different ways. You had a couple of reviews of how Swift are transforming their platform to a transaction-based platform. Can you explain what was in these 2 articles?
Swift, as you said, is moving from a messaging network for payments to a transaction platform. And that sounds like just a couple of words, but this is a fairly radical and massive modernization of what's going on in Swift. And, I think most people are thinking about Swift as they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. What this means is that they can add services on the front end of this, messaging platform and transaction platform. They can provide feedback all along the route. And that's very different from if there's a handoff of a message, from, let's say, a corporate to their bank, to the Swift network, maybe to a counterparty bank, to the final bank, and to the other recipient. Once you send that in the traditional ways, you have no idea where it is, what it costs, and until your counterparty receives it at the end. And so there's this whole gap of information.
But doesn't GPI solve that already?
Yeah, GPI is doing a significant work there with a tracking number that's really part of this transaction platform mindset. So that's like a early delivery there.
Okay, so we're getting much more than this, because this is going to impact treasurers in a big way. How sure are you that they're going to keep to the timeline that you're suggesting?
Yeah, so the timeline that we published relates to what Swift has provided, and they seem to be keeping well on track with the dates that they've laid out. They have some generous time frames. They seem to be meeting them. So this idea of pilot early adopters on some elements in early 22 for this more expanded offering, and with go live towards the end of next year for a more comprehensive set of features, seems like it's working.
And then they had something else, which they published a paper on the rollout of APIs right across the world and how they want to manage this, and getting the service providers and the banks and everybody to standardize their APIs. Now, this struck me as just a way of trying to control the world. Do you think that's what's happening here? Because Swift are all about standards and do what we do and don't do anything else.
Well, I think the big change in communication from file-based towards API is significant. I mean, that fits on their overall plan on trade, on payments. If you have an API, a simple way of initiating a payment, that can be very different from file-based, where you batch up a file, you connect through, let's say, SFTP, and it's sent. This API, this low-weight program, allows you to add more of these features so you could get information about it, the status at any point in time. It allows people to interact more easily with all of their types of tech. So it's a more accessible, more open banking, open treasury, open Swift type mindset for easier connectivity and additional services.
That's the traditional role of the API, but I think the issue is going to be getting standardization across the world, and the service providers don't necessarily follow Swift standards. Similarly, the banks are not. Is there any clues as to how we're going to rationalize all this?
Well, I think that's a massive question, but the idea that, let's say from a corporate perspective, if you're originating payments with your banks and they offer an API and you do it from your treasury platform.
Okay, it's going to be an ongoing problem, this, and the standardization of APIs, I think, is one of the central problems treasurers and the banks and all suppliers have. We're not coming up with any solution anytime soon, but Swift's play is on that paper. So if you're interested in this, read the article, How Swift Plans to Dominate Global Trade.
Well, just one comment on that. And Jack, on the standardization of APIs, you think of each bank has their own method of setting up an API and, creating this huge library. You see a number of tech firms doing that. Part of this is, can you act and connect to Swift with a smaller set of APIs to handle other types of origination or information sharing, and have a smaller universe of those APIs. So perhaps that's one way that this will become simpler for those that are trying to reach the entire universe of banks that are in the Swift network.
My final comment would be, this has got a long way to go before we get any resolution. Okay, moving on. We had a article from Cashforce, one of our associate members, and it was entitled Dark Data, Search, Collate and Conquer. Now, what they were doing was pointing out that there are two types of data, and the dark data is the stuff that is, they say it's astoundingly simple. Data is defined as unused or hidden data from relevant departments. And that's the problem inside companies, is that the data is hidden from other departments, or Treasury can't get at it. And they list all different areas. But they also listed in this article the problem of second line dark data, where things like correlations between types of cash flows, average projected incoming and outgoing cash flows, etc., and they're trying to examine the dynamics of cash flow forecasting and how you put it together. A very, very interesting article. The trouble is they just point out lots of the pitfalls and say, you've got to overcome these, then you collate them, and then it's easy. It's a good article, worth a read. In terms of rounding up other items, we had discussions of new supply chains in Asia, the takeover of TIPCO, an associate member by a Finnish company, Nementia, producing a much bigger and wider service provider. That'll be interesting watching. And the other interesting thing was how local countries, particularly in the Far East, in Asia Pacific, are setting up their own bank payment hubs to stop MasterCard and Visa and other national and international payment systems dominating their intra-country traffic. Again, an interesting development. So what would be your key takeaway from the last 2 weeks, Ben? I know you've been on holiday, but what would your key takeaway be from the last 2 weeks for treasurers?
Yeah, well, I think my key takeaway kind of stems from that vacation that I've just been on, because it's really kind of made me think about how all of us, even the most high-powered treasury professionals out there, do need to focus on well-being as part of our overall approach to work, particularly when you look back over the past 18 months when everyone's been under such increased stress from the pandemic and lockdowns and social distancing completely changing our entire way of life. I mean, treasury is a stressful job anyway, just the size of the numbers that are being moved around and the stress of making sure that you're doing everything correctly. When you now are suddenly doing that remotely, and as someone that personally, I've worked from home for about a decade now, it's very easy to get in kind of bogged down, not leaving your screen until, the end of the day, not the end of the work day, but the end of the actual day. So just kind of pushing the message of remembering to keep that focus on well-being, and treasury teams operate at their peak when everyone's firing on all cylinders, and you can't do that if you're not also taking time to look after yourself. So just a reflection, not really on anything that's happened in the news, but more based on my holiday.
And for you, Craig, what would be your takeaway from the last developments over the last 2 weeks?
Three of the things that we spoke about today were, you get put under the broad theme of technology is providing a more end-to-end and enriched experience for organizations. And I'll just summarize them quickly. CLS with additional data helping the process. Swift with a comprehensive platform that allows payments, for you to track and manage payments through an end-to-end view, but also do things like pre-validation and checking, so it allows a more enriched experience and value. And then on the tech side, for the article by Nicholas from Cashforce, this idea of there's other data that's now created that's accessible, that can be used for things like forecasting and managing. So all of those fit under that one theme. That would be my take.
Interesting. My pick would be expect the unexpected, how a really good supplier like TIPCO will disappear into, and they do disappear into, larger companies and groups that put together increasingly broader solutions. And we have to get used to this. It's not going to stop anytime soon.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.